following all of these rules falls entirely on the woman, and so, or on the cheerleader. And one of the teams had a rule that, like, you were never to be seen in public with a member of the football team. And if a member of the football team walked into a restaurant, you had to leave as the cheerleader. If he came up to talk to him, you had to. And if you violate that rule, you are fined as the cheerleader, not the football player. Everybody, we're the good doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I'm Dr. Kristen.
You are exceptionally welcome to our hot-ish take today, where we're talking about what you need to know about NFL cheerleaders and the culture of sexism that exists within it. We're doing this the weekend before the last weekday before the Super Bowl on purpose. Yeah, because everyone's talking about the Super Bowl. Was it the Rams and the Bengals?
And the mighty Bengals of Cincinnati, yes.
As a person who lives within the NFC North, I cannot cheer for Cincinnati. I will lose my Pittsburgh citizenship, but I understand that a lot of other people want to. And I wish them well. So everyone's talking about it. It's the most popular sport in the United States. It is the biggest, arguably, sporting event in the United States, probably in parts of the entire world. It's the Super Bowl. It's a real big deal. We spend this whole time talking about the teams, who's playing, who's not playing, what's it going to take, all the analytics. And, you know, in all of our time watching Super Bowls, Kristen, I don't think I've ever heard anyone really talk to me about the cheerleaders.
Never.
So that is why we're here today. If you watched our not live Good Doctors Diagnose on Tuesday, you know we're kind of in this cheer rabbit hole at present, cheerleading rabbit hole. I fell down this rabbit hole myself because I watched the show Cheer on Netflix. There was a sex abuse scandal with one of the stars of the show that led me down a rabbit hole into how awful things are in the land of NFL cheerleaders, in terms of the rules that they are required to follow, the way that their bodies are treated, the way that they are treated culturally, the kind of autonomy and control that they have, all of these things. It's not great, but we wanted to talk about it and spend some time highlighting it today.
It was a refreshing change for Dr. Erin to fall down a rabbit hole first, because normally I'm the one that finds the terrible things about humanity and then just drags her down with me. So it was kind of nice to be like, do you know about this? And I was like, no, tell me, teach me about how terrible things are. I will also say we're not going to be talking about the NBA cheerleaders. We're not going to be discussing collegiate cheerleading, NCAA cheerleading, anything else. The rules that we looked up are specifically to the NFL, and I think the culture shifts a little bit. The NBA has cheerleaders. The Laker girls are very famous. And I'm absolutely positive that they have some atrocious rules as well. But in this conversation, we are just going to be covering the National Football League of the United States.
Yeah, and, well, first of all, you're welcome for me dragging you down this rabbit hole. Second of all, you're right to point out, and there is a difference, and there has been some cultural change, in some of the other national sports. I mean, obviously hockey doesn't have cheerleaders. Baseball doesn't have cheerleaders. Some collegiate hockey teams have cheerleaders because the college has cheerleaders. Very famously, the University of Minnesota Golden Gophers, their cheerleaders ice skate and cheer.
Bless.
Yeah, they come out on the actual ice in cheerleading uniforms, which just sounds cold. But, you know, Major League Soccer doesn't have cheerleaders. So it's very much a big cultural thing in the National Football League, especially. In the NBA, it's a lot more dance teams now. And as I did this deep dive, I found that, you know, there was a hypersexualization of the predominant, like almost entirely female dance teams, and the type of dance they were doing and the clothing that they were wearing was all kind of emblematic of this sexist culture, hypersexualization of women, objectification of women culture. And they've had some growth and change.
Okay, cool.
There is a woman who is a choreographer that like was brought into a bunch of teams and like redesigned their style, and a lot of NBA dance squads, now they're called dance squads, wear like athletic pants and, you know, tank tops and
cool. I just remember that Paula Abdul got her start as a Laker girl.
Right. Yeah. Cool. So it's interesting to, like, we're kind of doing this backwards because normally at the end I'm like, well, I'll give you some hope, but I'll give you some hope now. There is change within a lot of this, and a lot of the stories I was reading were from like the early to mid 2000s, like 2017, 2018 time, pre-COVID time. And there has been some more recent responses from the teams. And one of the biggest problems I learned in the NFL is there is not a national organization. Like, the NFL doesn't have a policy on cheerleaders specifically, or they don't control the cheerleaders. They might have policies, but they don't set the rules and regulations for the jobs. The individual teams do.
That feels dangerous.
It feels like there could be some problems there.
Yeah, it feels
because
very
not
Baptist.
Not all teams have like this. The Pittsburgh Steelers famously have never had cheerleaders, and so not all teams like even have them, but most of them do. And so it's down to the individual team to decide what the boundaries of that employment are, because they're jobs. They don't get paid a lot, but we'll get into that.
They're not even minimum wage in most states.
In a lot of places, it's not even minimum wage, and you know, many of the women work other jobs as well to live. So within the NFL, you know, and we've got articles linked in the show notes of like the history of the evolution of cheerleading. It used to be an all male activity, way back in the late 19th century. Because only men were allowed to go to college. So you could only have male cheerleaders.
Or show their ankles. So, like, you know, we had I'm just imagining right now somebody being a flyer while wearing a bustle. Like, that would be, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, you know, women weren't allowed to go to college because they weren't even allowed to vote. So certainly they weren't cheerleaders. And then, fascinatingly, we get the hypersexualization of the concept of cheerleaders specifically for football starts in the 1970s, and in part because of a series of pornographic films, where a woman named Debbie Does Dallas, very famously, like, slept with all of the cowboys, I believe.
Yeah. Okay, I've heard of. Okay.
We've all heard of, like, not
Debbie
all of
Does
us,
Dallas.
A lot of us have heard of Debbie Does Dallas. Yeah, it was like there was a couple, like there was a sequel and a.
Yeah, and it's like a cultural joke. Like, it's one of the things that, like, when people are joking about porn, they talk about Debbie Does Dallas. It's the Playboy of visual porn in that way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so.
Okay.
Oh yeah. So the story goes that the owner of the Dallas Cowboys in real life saw the movie and realized the potential to keep the fans engaged.
Sounds like the ownership of the Cowboys historically, so I'm okay, this tracks.
Predominantly male fan base, certainly within the NFL, and especially at that time. And so really from the 1970s on, we start to see, first with the Dallas Cowboys and then a lot of other cheerleaders, the really revealing outfits like bras and you know, crop tops and shorts and there's a whole appearance of an NFL cheerleader.
Yeah, and I would say the Dallas Cowboys would be like one of the, if you don't know anything about America, you know the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders. Like, they're
Sure.
one of those
like
things.
Internationally,
Oh,
they are known. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we get this then, you know, and we can talk about, like, the rise of televised sports and cable television and, like, all of these things that societally have changed since the 1970s.
Yeah, and the incredible capitalization of sport.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. All of that stuff has created this environment in which these women's bodies are, you know, trimmed within an ounce of their lives, and, like, they are in some of these instances with some of these teams disgustingly controlled. Their lives, their bodies, their appearance, their weight, their, like, physical and emotional health. All of these things can be regulated in a way that I would see as dehumanizing. There's a lot of women who are involved in cheerleading in the NFL and do it happily and love their jobs. We have had in the last, as I was saying, like 5 or 6 years, several cheerleaders come forward and file complaints and file lawsuits against individual teams for violations of equal employment opportunity and various other things. So that is the lay of the land in which we now stand. And as I was doing this deep dive, it was real. I found this article. It's linked below. When we talked about, I'll backtrack a little bit. When we talked about Dopesick and the opioid crisis, we said, the benefit of lawsuits is that we get a lot of documents.
Yeah.
Of things. So the benefits of these lawsuits that these women, like, we didn't know. Sometimes, like, handbooks, they're called, like, cheerleading handbooks, they get leaked. But we didn't really know until some of these lawsuits, and then they became part of the public record. These handbooks where we could see the rules that were written down for these cheerleaders. And so that's where it's just gone real bad. So I found this article that's literally all the sexist rules NFL cheerleaders have to follow. And pay equity is a huge problem. Cheerleaders make as little as $5 per hour, which just sounds like a lot.
Like, your Uber
work.
driver makes more than that. Like,
yeah. And yeah, you must wear. This is from the. I'm trying to find out which team this is. One team installed 2-piece Tuesdays, during which all cheerleaders must show their belly button at Tuesday's practice. Like, the rules for this and, like, they're so punitive, too. Like, if you violate the rules, you get fined. There was one team, cheerleaders are required to attend events in which they wear bikinis and are auctioned off. And we should say, like, these humans, mostly women, some teams now have male cheerleaders, but mostly women, are exceptionally talented dancers and athletes.
Yeah, they have to be.
They have to be. A lot of them are classically trained dancers, or they were professional cheerleaders, or all of these things. And they are not valued in a way that is commensurate to their talent, and a way that treats them as I see it, as human beings. Like, if these women are professional dancers and you're requiring them to attend events in bikinis, and they tell stories of, they're required to talk to donors and supporters, financiers of the football team, and they aren't allowed to complain if they make sexist jokes or if they put their hand on their ass, and it's all of this where they are turned into these objects, predominantly from the male gaze.
Yeah.
Hypersexualizing these women. And that seems to be the baseline for a lot of these rules.
Yep.
Which, just for professionalism, just doesn't make sense. But as we said, it's now so much about the appearance and the marketing and the making money.
And to get really academic for a minute, one of the kind of critiques of American football is that it is fairly homoerotic. that the way that men's bodies move and kind of go and all this other stuff is that for a famously homophobic sport, it is a very homoerotic physical activity. And so one of the critiques for the presence of cheerleaders is that the cheerleaders are there to remind everybody that everyone is straight.
Yeah.
Don't worry, we are straight.
Look at all of us. We're straight.
All of us, down to a person, are straight. Don't you worry. No one here is
Because look, like jiggling boobs, and we're leering at these women, and we wouldn't do that if we weren't straight. Exactly.
So if I mean, I should say nearly every sport is homoerotic. Like men's bodies moving in sport, women's bodies moving in sport. It's fairly frequently erotic in some way. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, like if rugby had cheerleaders, they would be there for this reason too.
Oh, for sure.
If football had if proper football, if soccer had cheerleaders, they would be there for this reason too. The NFL has always kind of marketed itself as the real American man, eats red meat, drives a truck, and has a favorite football team.
Yep.
And part and parcel of that masculine, defined masculinity is that you also have the calendar of the cheerleaders of your team up in your garage where your wife doesn't have to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, it is so much about this, maintaining this idea of, a lot of people would use the term toxic masculinity. We've sort of adopted narrow masculinity. The scholar Jackson Katz, who does a lot of work around masculinity in the United States, uses that term more readily. It's a very narrowly defined version of masculinity that is based in a lot of these ideas. And therefore then creates a very narrowly defined version of femininity that is thin, mostly white, straight hair, big boobs, and available. Physically and sexually available for the men who are in charge. And so many of their rules are about this. Some of the teams have rules that the women aren't allowed to wear underwear while they're performing, including thong underwear. Okay. So what is that about? Like, you don't want underwear lines. Okay, I mean, that's sexist and proprietary, but you don't want underwear lines. But thong underwear, like, you don't. So now it's just making them a sexual object, that the point is to know that they're not wearing underwear, which just sounds uncomfortable with those really, really tight shorts, but what do I know? I had to play volleyball in those really, really short, really, really tight shorts. Not great. And they're not allowed to, they have to pass like weight tests, and they have to dress a certain way even when they're outside of the cheerleading. And all of this kind of control and regulation of who they talk to, what they do, what they wear, how they act. I found, as I dove into this, deeply disturbing. I mean, there's a rule with one of the teams that the responsibility for all of this, following all of these rules, falls entirely on the woman, or on the cheerleader. And one of the teams had a rule that, like, you were never to be seen in public with a member of the football team. And if a member of the football team walked into a restaurant, you had to leave as the cheerleader. If he came up to talk to him, you had to. And if you violate that rule, you are fined as the cheerleader, not the football player. And I was like, have we gone back in time?
Yeah.
Like, there's one of them, the Raiderettes, so the now, wherever Las Vegas Raiders.
Yeah, Las Vegas Raiders.
Across the board, the handbooks discourage the women from fraternizing with football players, but the Raiderettes handbook took it one step further. I want to just read this, and then I'll leave the rules and we can just discuss. There have been few relationships between the two groups that have resulted in a few happy marriages and lovely children. However, we have also had more situations where, quite frankly, the Raider organization and the Raiderettes narrowly escaped ruined reputations. So the organization and the Raiderettes, not the football player who was ostensibly involved. One such example concerns a player who gave Halloween parties every year, and many of the Raiderettes attended. The same player was suspended from the team for drug use, but also arrested for date rape. For you on the squad who have attended those parties, just think how narrowly you missed having your photo in all the local papers and or being assaulted.
I am confused
Like,
as to the prioritization of that statement.
Uh-huh.
And would like to burn everything to the ground.
Like, what world is this, folks? Like, Dr. Kristen and I are pragmatic and realistic people. We understand that by and large the world is a cesspool. We know what the patriarchy is. We know what systemic misogyny and sexism looks like. We live it every day. We read about it for fun. And I read this and I was like, what are you talking about?
It smacks so much of purity culture, this double standard of
Yeah.
that your body is for our consumption and or our pleasure or our needs, but you do not inhabit your body.
Yeah. At no point do you own it, and do you have the right to say what is or is not done about it.
Yeah, so it's not actually, even though the cheerleaders are so hypersexualized, it's not actually a hop, skip, and a jump too far between true love weights and purity rings and this nonsense.
Yeah.
It's all from the same pool.
It all comes from the same place. And, you know, I just can't get over that sentence where it's like, you just think of how you narrowly avoided being in the paper or being assaulted. And so the fact that they prioritized the team's reputation over your physical safety.
The institution will always protect itself.
The institution will always protect itself. Because these teams make so much money every year on ticket sales, merchandise, advertising, all that jazz, it's hugely risky for them to have some kind of scandal in which their team reputation is damaged, because a damaged reputation means a damaged pocketbook. And I was watching this and I was like, I'm not sure I can watch NFL anymore and condone this from my perspective. And as I said at the beginning, like, there's lots of women who enjoy this career and who have a good time and enjoy their jobs and love what they do and aren't mad about how they're treated, maybe. But as a person researching this from an academic perspective and as an educator, boy, I wouldn't want my daughter within 100 yards, within a football field's length of any of these organizations.
I think the lesson that we can all take from this is the importance of curiosity. Yes. So football is incredibly easy to consume passively. It is in so many places in the United States, so many cities, so many households, something that is just in the air from August to February.
Yeah. And the number of times we just put the game on and do the dishes, do the finances, clean something, work on a craft.
It's on in a
whatever.
Restaurant you walk into.
On. Yeah, like everywhere.
When I was growing up, whether or not I was an Eagles fan was inconsequential. I still knew exactly if they had won or lost that weekend. And there are mechanics of the sport of football that I enjoy watching. It is one of my least favorite physical sports to watch because I don't find the strategy all that complicated or interesting. Just to be frank, I am much more fascinated by the strategies around both baseball and soccer than I am, and I'm growing to become much more interested in hockey than I am the physicality, the physical metrics and mechanisms of football. Just not as interesting to me.
Yeah.
However, throw on the game most weekends because the background noise of a stadium and someone talking about it is incredibly soothing to me.
Yeah.
And I get a lot done.
Yeah, culturally.
But until, I don't know, probably my 20s, I never stopped to think about what it meant that America watched this much football. I never stopped to think about what it meant that the certain cultures around the teams and how they are so emblematic of the city itself in some ways. That there are teams that do this, and kind of what this looks like. And I never really stopped to kind of get critical in any way, shape, or form. And I don't remember ever really thinking about the cheerleaders until I moved to Texas and met somebody whose sister was a Dallas Cowboys cheerleader. And loved her job because it was the only time she got to dance. And it was the only time she got to perform. And the rest of the week she was a CPA. That was not customer facing because the firm was afraid to let the customers know that one of their accountants was a Cowboys cheerleader.
Yeah.
And when my friend told me that, I sat there and thought, well, that is not great. That feels dirty and that feels wrong. And then I just got really judgy and I was like, oh, it's just Texas.
Yeah.
Because there was so much else in the sexism of Texas that is unique to Texas that it was just very easy for me to emotionally brush that under the rug and say, oh, this is Texas. But the more I've studied women in sports and the more I listen to wonderful podcasts like Burn It All Down and The Gist, and the more female and non-binary and various other diverse voices we get within sports media, sports analysis, sports coverage, the more curious I am encouraged to be about the sports that I consume. Yeah. None of them are unproblematic.
No,
not a
absolutely
single
not.
damn one.
Yeah.
And the NFL is one of the worst. I won't lie. Like, it's real bad. It's real. Roger Goodell is real bad.
It's real bad.
Real bad. But regardless whether or not the cheerleaders enjoy their job, there's not a person on the planet that does not deserve a fair wage for the labor that they put in. Any dance squad that is not paid for practices, it makes me angry. I don't believe any of them are paid for practices. Or if they are, they're certainly not paid for their time off the dance studio where they have to practice the routines or figure things out. And there are definitely football teams that pay for extra practice, and things like that. So the double standard is a problem. The rules are disgusting and a problem. The way that we treat football players versus, honestly, almost every other sport in this country, and definitely when we take this down to your local level, and we all know the stereotypes about football players and cheerleaders. One of the international packages that America sells around the world is quarterbacks and cheerleaders. And that we put this out as a wholesome all-American package, and cheerleaders have pom-poms and blonde pigtails and go team. We have so culturally narrowed what these women do, and therefore we assume we know everything about them, and they are sex objects who say go team and will marry the quarterback, and their life is great and it's better than mine, and I shouldn't think about them anyway because pretty women are the enemy. So we may as well just never think about them again, and it kills our curiosity. Yeah. So one of the best ways to fight this is to be curious.
And I think, the thing that I would want to pull from this is if we extrapolate this idea of narrowly defined sex and gender roles. It's not good for the men either to be that narrowly defined and to not be allowed. And that, if we go from the small to the big picture of it all, we know we have instances, high rates of domestic and intimate partner abuse within the NFL. Again, all sports, yes, but it's, I believe, the highest within the NFL. And we have a deep cultural problem with prosecuting and holding players accountable who are domestic and intimate partner abusers. And nobody gets to be a full human in this scenario. Everybody is objectified in a way that is a very narrow definition of who they are. And when we hold people to those standards, it becomes toxic everywhere. From the top and the NFL all the way down to the humans, the little child humans, regardless of where they fall on gender and sexual spectrums, that love football and want to play it. And the kind of lessons that it teaches, and the very restrictive roles that it forces people into. And we're still at a stage in our understanding of this sport where, if there is a woman who is, we are now getting women on coaching levels and some playing levels. And it is still a story of, an exact, this is outside the norm. Look at this woman. She's amazing. She's a kicker for this collegiate team. And she talks about how much she loves football and always wanted to play it and what she went through to break those barriers. So I think, it may seem like that we're just criticizing the NFL or that it's not that big of a deal, but when we establish these patterns of treatment and of viewing humans as less than whole, as less than full, as something that they can't break out of, that has ripple effects all throughout society. And that's one of the reasons why we, A, got angry about this, and then B, wanted to talk about it.
And I think that's a great place to hit pause. So this weekend, however you interact with the Super Bowl, there's a couple things we'd love for you to keep in mind. That the women are not being paid potentially at peanuts to be there. It's possible they paid their own travel expenses. It's possible that they are not physically safe as they cheer on the sidelines. Remember that the Super Bowl is the highest weekend of the entire American calendar year of intimate partner violence incidences. So keep in mind those people around the country who are terrified of what's about to happen to them on Sunday, no matter whose team wins or loses. Remember as well that sports is hopeful and beautiful, and the cities of Cincinnati and Los Angeles could be bathed in joy this weekend. And it is one of the beautiful things that sports can give. I loved being in Philadelphia the year we won the Super Bowl, the week after the Super Bowl. And I know Erin feels the same way about Pittsburgh when the Steelers won. There's an energy that is so much fun.
Yeah, and we love sports so much. But what we always say is that everything is problematic, and you can love something and still critique it and still ask it to be better and ask tough questions and be curious about it, because that's how the change happens.
So we ask you to hold that all in tension while you eat your 7-layer dip, or do your, whatever food eating contest at your Super Bowl party, or as you watch the Puppy Bowl and ignore this altogether. We ask that you hold in tension that joy and trauma can come from the same place for sometimes even the same people. So this has been our hottest take conversation on NFL cheerleading. And whenever you're watching this, what we would ask is if you thought it was valuable or entertaining or rage-inducing, I don't know, hit the thumbs up button so that the YouTube algorithm knows to pass this off to other people. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. If you're listening to this on the podcast, rate and review us wherever you are. Whenever you are consuming this, however you are consuming this, we are honored that you have given us your time. We would love to know if you have found it worth it. In the meantime, until we see you again, we hope that you are doing a job you love. We hope that you are safe doing it and compensated well. See you guys next time.
Take care, everybody.